Hello and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Derrick Yanford, a Vedic meditation teacher based here in New York City, and I'm joined with my Vedic colleagues Thompson in London and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. This episode was recorded in the middle of June, and we're talking about charm. We examine how we look to charm as a way to follow our intuition, discovering which direction to take. But first, sit back and listen to our stories, and then we'll dive into the conversation. As always, don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll offer a practical exercise in how you can apply this knowledge into your daily life. And don't forget to please subscribe to our channel.
I'm Rory. In 2005, when I was only a year or so into my journalism career, I decided to take the plunge and move from Birmingham, where I'd been, to uni, to London to try my luck in the big smoke. Now, the plan was to get a job at one of the classier men's magazines like Arena or GQ or Esquire. But I quickly found that pretty much every other 20-something guy in the country had the same idea. And I spent about 9 months living in Brixton in South London, getting rejected from Arena, doing a postgraduate diploma in magazine journalism and applying for every half-decent job that came up. I got more and more desperate until I came across a competition run by a trade paper called the Press Gazette, where they were looking for the best young cadet journalists, and where the winner would get a year's contract working for them as a reporter. And having not had a job for almost a year, even this long shot of a competition looked like a good option. And over 100 people applied, but I made it to the final 12, who all got to compete in this apprentice-style contest that went for about a month, with tasks at these different major news organizations. So we did a shift at Time Out magazine and played being news editor at ITV News and wrote a feature for the Daily Mirror. And each week more and more contestants were eliminated. And it got to the final week and I couldn't believe I was still in. There were 2 other people left, and the final task really pushed us all out of our comfort zones. They put us in front of a camera reading the news off an auto cue at the offices of the Press Association. And then everything kind of went a bit weird and seemed like a dream as I was crowned the winner. And the judges even said, "Rory loves the camera and the camera loves Rory," which I found hilarious. And this was the first thing I'd won since breaking my high school high jump record in the sixth form, and I was over the moon. So I was offered the job as junior reporter for the paper with a 12-month contract and the possibility of permanent employment. But as the world rarely makes things straightforward, another job opportunity was presented at the same time, leaving me with a dilemma. During the competition, I'd picked up a couple of casual shifts for Channel 4's music department, working on their website, a gig I got as a consolation prize for almost but not quite getting a job at Esquire magazine. And I loved Channel 4 at the time, and working in music was a real dream come true for me. And it was only 2 weeks cover for someone who was off sick, but then they offered me 2 months work as the person wasn't going to come back for a bit longer. So here was my choice: take the guaranteed 12-month contract working for the industry paper, or gamble it all on a short-term contract working in music. And the fact that I had this roller coaster of a ride to get through the competition, to even be offered that job in the first place, made it very hard to give up. But then on the other side was something working in my biggest passion since I've been a teenager. Now, my head and all of my sensible friends said to go for the guaranteed job, but my heart said to go with music. And I'd always been a very logical and pragmatic person, so it came as a surprise even to me when I heard myself turning down the year-long contract and instead opting for the sick cover role. But I needn't have worried because everything worked out in the end and there was a happy ending. My gamble paid off and the role became permanent, and I worked there for the next 3 years, going to gigs, interviewing bands and earning a living writing about music. And it was a great lesson for me in following my gut instinct, or following charm. Follow charm fearlessly is one of the key Vedic directives to meditators. And the mind is a great tool for kind of ratifying or justifying decisions, but it's no good at actually making them. There are too many variables in life decisions for the mind to compute, but our gut or our intuition has a much better idea. All we have to do is follow charm.
I'm Derrick. After spending a year touring Europe, I moved back to the States, to Philadelphia, to perform with a dance company that had offered me a contract the year prior. And although they were first on my list of companies that I wanted to work with, I had signed my contract to travel to Europe the day before they offered me the job. Fortunately, after my European tour had ended, there was still a spot open, and they offered me the position once again. Upon my arrival to Philadelphia, I was told by the artistic director that she had changed her mind and that she wanted to find a dancer who was taller than I was. And this put me in a rather precarious position because now I was in Philadelphia, jobless and homeless, and I wasn't really sure what my future would be. Luckily, I was able to secure a lease without being employed, and I had run into a good friend from college who'd mentioned the company she was dancing for was having an audition, and she encouraged me to go. It was to take place 45 minutes outside of the city, and I didn't have a car, but I arrived there on time in a rented moving van, as it happened to be on the same day that I was moving into my new apartment. Right before the audition started, the owner of the studio entered the room announcing that she had just lost one of her regular teachers and asked if anybody was interested in picking up the classes starting the following week. Without missing a beat, I raised my hand and I said I would be happy to cover the classes, even though I was not familiar with the area, the demands of the job, or how I would even get there. The circumstances that I had found myself in were unimaginable, and had I thought about it enough, I might not have taken the chance. But I had this feeling that it was meant to be and that everything would work out just fine. And I'm so glad I listened to that gut feeling. Subsequently, I was hired by the dance company, and I ended up working for the studio for about 7 years. And I was given a myriad of opportunities to teach, choreograph, and direct for both live theater and television. I forged a great relationship with the studio owner and was able to prosper as a young professional artist. Now, thinking back to it all, it was this feeling inside of me that had guided my actions. I listened to this little inner voice pushing and pulling me into these directions. And I was never quite sure what was going to happen, but I just decided to follow and not really question. I know this now to be what we refer to as charm. Charm is the spontaneous and natural attraction to the proposition of taking action. Spontaneous and natural in the sense that it occurs without having to think about it. It is often just signals us without notice, nudging and urging us to move in a particular direction, even when our minds may not be able to make sense out of why we should do so. However, what we find when we listen to and follow charm is that we gain the results of a favorable outcome. The request that charm is making can oftentimes be completely inconsistent with our own behavior. But the more familiar we become with charm, the more we understand its power and presence. Now, I like to think of charm as being our intuitive compass. It is nature's navigation device, giving us instructions of where to go next. And this is most profound in those who have a consistent twice-a-day practice of Vedic meditation. And in terms of how to proceed when it comes to taking one route over another, Vedic meditation practitioners can often find their path to be gold-dusted with charm, reassuring us that what lies ahead is meant to be.
Hi, I'm Anthony. Over the years, I've sailed lots of small boats, which are highly maneuverable and adaptable. There's this very visceral feeling. You're out there on the water holding the sail via a rope in one hand and the rudder in the other, and you're constantly assessing the situation. You're reading the sky and observing the clouds for the wind direction and wind speed. You're feeling the wind on your skin. You're looking at the water to check currents and see if there's a swell or big waves are coming along. You're constantly having to make adjustments to ensure you're moving forward in the direction you would like with as much ease as possible. When I set out, I sometimes have a particular destination in mind, or perhaps I'm just going to sail about and catch the strongest wind so that I can go as fast as possible in any direction. Sometimes I'm charmed by a particular plan before I've even got into the boat, and on other occasions, something might appeal after I've got out onto the ocean and got a better idea of what's going on. Following charm is sometimes seen as capricious, erratic, or impulsive, but as a long-term meditator, I found I no longer spend a great deal of time working out what to do, pondering for ages over all the pros and cons, overthinking. In life, as with sailing, as we move forward, we have to make adjustments because everything is in a state of change, nothing is constant. Sometimes these adjustments are microscopic, and on other occasions they're much bigger. We might have to change direction or perhaps abandon our intention because everything is in a state of flux. Occasionally we're stumped and don't know if we should engage with what is charming us. Sometimes we have a stronger opposite feeling, one of aversion, and this can help us too. It's when we recognize and acknowledge what we don't want to engage with that we can turn in the opposite direction, where it's more likely we'll find the answer. When we resist change, when we resist moving forward, things can get a little bit bumpy and uncomfortable. It's only when we turn our face towards the oncoming wind that we find we have some energy and some motion which we can harness. Things then become smoother and we can move forward with grace and without difficulty. We're constantly assaulted by charm coming at us from every direction and in multiple forms, such as people, ways to spend our time or money, social media. And we often engage with these things without really assessing their merit, without asking it if this is helpful or nourishing, or is it just a kind of temporary form of amusement or gratification. I'm in Hyde Park in London, and behind me you can see a large sculpture by the artist George Frederick Watts from 1902. It's entitled Physical Energy, which he described as a homage to that restless physical impulse to seek the still unachieved in the domain of material things, a homage to perhaps acquisition, consumerism, and avarice. It's ironic that such a sculpture representing the material world should be placed in nature, in the middle of the park at the intersection of 4 avenues of trees. People can see it at the end of these long vistas and are charmed and drawn towards it. Even here in this beautiful place, we're reminded of the shopping mall. When we meditate, we have a better understanding of the context of where these things lie. We can be charmed by a new friendship or job, or a new pair of trainers, or a slice of delicious cake, to do this or to do that. We all like a bit of pay and display from time to time, but so often what charmed us is short-lived, temporary, and unfulfilling. Through our daily meditation practice, we find we're able to assess charm more accurately. There is less deliberation and delay. We take spontaneous right action, trusting our intuition, which is finely tuned through our practice. The more connected we are with our inner nature, the greater our satisfaction and fulfillment. When we're charmed, our clear-sightedness, together with perspective and acuity, help us make the right decisions at the right time.
Derrick, I really like your story about the way it kind of flipped your destination was flip-flopping, almost by every half hour. Were you going to be, and then it was going to be like this. And your strong reference to the removal van, I thought that was going to feature more heavily in your story, but it just had a bit part.
When I think about that story, which I haven't in a long time, when I drove the van there was all kinds of construction and detours and all this kind of stuff, which they had warned me about. Like, you might have some trouble finding the place because the road that usually runs to the studio isn't there. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. And so I left a little bit earlier, and I had like, not a lot of stuff, but I had like stuff in the back of my van because I was going to move into my apartment that day. So it was all very new beginnings, and I thought it was kind of poignant. But I needed a job. I thought I left Europe thinking that I had a job. I had a conversation. I had only been to Philadelphia twice before. I was living in New York before that. I had no plans to move to Philly other than to dance for this company. And so when I got there and kind of had the rug literally taken out from underneath me, it was like, it was interesting how a lot of things just kind of happened and coincided. And especially, I was a real estate agent in New York. So this was 1998, I believe. I lived in a high-rise apartment with no job, no income, and no history of being in Philadelphia. How that happened, I have no idea. Very fortunate.
I often get reminded in these stories of the film Sliding Doors, when you can, do you get on, do you get off, do you turn left, do you turn right, and that can literally change your life. And it's, I think it's always fascinating to realize that really we have very little control over the circumstances, but what we do have control over is our outlook. It's placing the content within the broader context so that we actually see what, later, or maybe if we're very finely tuned at that particular moment, we know exactly what's going on, but we just go with the flow.
Yeah, what I thought for Rory, from your story, what I thought was interesting too is that maybe along with me as well, that this charm idea was probably a little bit more present when we were younger than versus when we got older. Because I feel like now that you get older, you have more experience, you think a lot more about where you want to be, how the future is going to be, and all this stuff. And when we're younger, it's like, yeah, I'm not really sure. I'll just take this chance or whatnot. So it was interesting how your story was also like as a 20-year-old, because I was like 21, I think.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's probably, for people listening, it's a hard one where we're saying follow charm, but it's this really fine line where it's not like, it was great in your one, Anthony, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but this, how you decide what's this shiny, consumer product you might like to buy and what is the real charming thing. And that's why I think this directive of follow charm fearlessly that we mentioned this is only for meditators, because if you say that to someone who's full of stress, they're going to be like, right, I'm going to have that 5th coffee, that sounds charming, or I'm going to have that 3rd bottle of wine, or I'm going to buy that expensive car that I can't afford, I'm just going to get on credit. And it's really important just to say that it's not about just following any whim. It's when we're at our most rested state, by being, Derrick, you said it in yours, by meditating twice a day, we are getting down to that least excited state where we can tap into that bigger consciousness, the big self, not the small self, because the small self will be the one saying, buy the BMW. I know you haven't got a job, but just do it. Get the credit card, just do it. Whereas it's about, so I think the way I've heard this described, well, one, it's only for meditators. We need to really hammer that down, because otherwise you're going to be doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But two, it's about identifying the feeling aspect of it. So the way that I've heard it described is they have different feelings attached. So something that is going to be good for your evolution and the evolution of everyone around you is going to have an expansive feeling to it. So you're going to be like, I'm charmed to do this. How does it feel? Yeah, it feels good, feels expansive. Whereas something that might be more of an ego want is going to feel a bit more constricted. So it's more like, I'm doing this just for me. And that, yeah, I guess that feeling would correspond to, am I doing it just for me? Or am I doing it for, is there a wider feeling of good for this? And, you know, so for me and your stories both, you know, I definitely wasn't a meditator when I had that incident, but it doesn't mean that we don't naturally have these experiences of charm anyway. And I think for me, in my story, it was a classic case of, you know, security versus passion. And doing things for security is, you know, going towards the safe is usually, you know, not the wisest thing to do, because we want to be adventurous and we want to go into the unknown, and we grow more and we develop more by trusting the unknown. And especially if it's in line with something that is already a passion for us, like mine was with the music, because at this point I'd been kind of a semi-professional musician for 3 or 4, 5 years before this, and then moving to London, it was much more in line with my whole narrative to go, oh yeah, great, you can now get a job writing about music, rather than the other one, which was like, I would have had to have worn a suit and tie and been, you know, it probably would have been the suit I wore in the 6th form, which would have been all shiny because we wore it every day for 2 years. And while it would have been great and I would have learned loads of stuff, it didn't fit into my kind of overall storyline. But yeah, Derrick, I guess your point is that when we're younger, we've got less responsibilities. So you can be like, okay, fine, you know, what's the worst that will happen? Maybe my family can bail me out or whatever. We're still in that kind of growth period. But it was fascinating for me that we both kind of picked stories like that, because I think this comes in really importantly with these big life decisions. We're not talking about, shall I have eggs on toast for breakfast or muesli, although it does fit into that, but it's much more powerful in these big life decisions where nobody knows. Like, there's not like an official result on should Derrick stay in New York or should Derrick stay in Philadelphia. No one knows this because there's too many variables to compute. So yeah, I loved how we both picked these kind of pivotal moments, because this is when it really plays in. Because, you know, just another example, when I bought a property here a few years ago, I quickly learned that, because I used a buyer's agent because I don't know the local market, and I found that if a property didn't feel right, and I'd reply in logical arguments like its location's not very good, or, you know, the room sizes are small, he'd kind of argue with me on it. But if I said, it doesn't feel right, he'd just be like, okay, cool, on to the next one. How there's this kind of, for big decisions like buying a house, there's this thing where it's like, if it doesn't feel right, well, you're not going to live with that not feeling right. So that just this professional was just like, okay, that's the ceiling thing for these huge purchases, is whether it feels right or not, because no one knows whether that area is going to develop, whether that rail line's actually going to go through there. All those kind of logistical things, they're all like speculation. But knowing to trust your gut feeling kind of fits in. People know it. This is why it's another one of these bits of Vedic knowledge where it's not something new. It's like, we kind of know this, following your gut. It's like what all good detectives do in the movies. It's this thing that exists, but through Vedic meditation, we get it in the context of how you develop that. And that's like, I think in your piece, Anthony, you were talking about how it's, you know, very important that we meditate twice a day, and how that gives us, I loved your kind of sailing analogy about, you know, it's the winds of fate are so kind of fickle that we have to be on it, you know, all the time.
Yeah, I think this idea that we ignore the signals at our peril is a really important thing. And I think sometimes when we get older, you suggested, Rory, that perhaps we have a more sensible approach to things. But the danger is that you then get stuck in the ever-repeating known, and that you get stuck in the status quo and your comfort zone. And that's what you're used to when you're younger. You're familiar and able to kind of dance around and adapt quite quickly. But then as time goes by, the danger is that you get set in your ways, you get stuck. And so that when change comes along, for a non-meditator, I would suggest that it is a bigger shock. There's a bigger upheaval because you've been around doing something for so long. And I think the fascinating thing that's happening now during lockdown and over the last 3 or 4 months is that people have had to be much, much more adaptable and recalibrating what is charming. Because, we've had the opportunity to stay at home. We could have watched Netflix all day. We could have, gone from a stud to a spud in couch potato in, just a couple of months. Some people have probably done that. But the thing I find with meditation is that, we get away from addressing our neediness. That, we want the car, we want that pair of shoes or whatever it is, that no longer really holds as much charm as it did. What is much more fulfilling is addressing the needs of others, and that becomes more charming rather than addressing your own needs in a rather selfish and personal way.
It's interesting that you say that too, because I feel like the more you meditate, this thing that's charming that may pop up out of nowhere may not have any relevance to what's even going on in your life currently. There's just this, why would I even think that I should get up and go in this direction? I have no business being there. But like with everything else, the more you practice that, oh, this is just charm's way of knocking on my door, like it always does. So just innocently, and like you said, Rory, fearlessly follow it, because it's going to bring you to something. And the beauty about that is that you don't have to know. You don't have to intellectualize or brainstorm or figure out what it is. You just know that charm is doing its job, is to orient you in this direction. In much the way that we talk about our mantra being charming to the mind. Well, the same reason that the mind follows the mantra, it's attractive to it. It has something in there that's attractive. And, the more you meditate, the more you realize, oh, this is charm. Here it is again, and how fortunate you are. And like what you were saying, Anthony, too, how you were talking about the statue being charming for the people who were there. I think what becomes charming for us starts to change as well. I remember just the other day, I was walking or something, and I just all of a sudden got this very charming feeling to contact a friend that I hadn't in a while. And I picked up the phone and was so glad that we talked, because there was this whole other scenario that was going on about, he thought that our friendship was in peril and all this stuff. And he was like, I was going to call you. And I was like, okay, cool. This is what it's all about. This is exactly what I didn't think. Why should I call him? I didn't think, why is the idea of him to call popping up? I just simply said, this is charm, pick up the phone and do it. It's a lovely way to operate in the world, especially when there's so many choices to be making. Sometimes you want to rationalize, well, what's the best use of my time? What's going to bring me the most, whatever it is. And with charm, you don't have to do that so much. You can just go, ooh, it's this way.
I think there's an interesting flip side to that, which is the aversion. You become less inclined to go in or continue with something. So, for example, I decided to close down 2 of my businesses because it was charming to take that very positive step to stop something. And I wanted to create space to then allow me to move in a new direction, but I didn't really know what that was. But I knew that maintaining the status quo was not sustainable, that had to stop. And then by taking that affirmative action, it then allowed me to create space to just kind of look around and see, okay, what now is the next thing to do? Because I think sometimes we are so busy that, I see this with non-meditators, that the busyness of their lives is swamping them, that they don't, and as you were saying, with so much contact and information coming along, they don't know which way to turn. They haven't got breathing space. And as meditators, we have 2 20-minute breathing spaces when we can actually recalibrate and stand back and allow that chance. And of course, every time we're meditating, as you've both alluded to or mentioned, the mantra is charming us into that field of bliss, which is so, so important. And that's where the bliss resides, inside. It's not the stuff outside.
Yeah, and I guess it's also a case of, so the world's constantly changing, and you were alluding to that, like with the sailing conditions, Anthony, and how I guess charm also allows us to change course, quite dynamically and quite quickly, because there's another aspect of this where we want to be consistent with our goals. So say a few years ago, I wrote the first draft of a novel, and I could have been like, no, I want to just I need to finish this. I need to do, you need to do about 7 drafts to finish a novel. But it's not always that first bit of charm means that you have to go the full distance on something, which would have been me committing maybe like 5 years of my life to doing that. It may just mean that cookie of charm, that breadcrumb of charm, takes you in a certain direction so that you can then see, oh no, I need to be here, or I need to be here. And that doesn't mean that we're just, completely, feathers in the wind, but it means that for me with the writing, it's like, okay, I needed to write that first draft of a novel so that I could become a better writer. But then by that point, I was learning to be a meditation teacher. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm learning to be a better writer so that I can use my writing to be a more effective promoter of meditation. And it just means that if we're solidly stuck single-mindedly to one goal, then we miss the opportunities, so that we don't see that, I was only following that to get to this point, to this stepping stone, when then I could jump to this one, and then when I could jump to this one. So I remember this old quote that said something like, people who slavishly follow their dreams end up, doing things that they used to want, or, you become something that you used to want to be. So, and I think that's classic when you look at, people who are, and you have to be that to be top in your field, so like a tennis player who would do it from 7 to 35, and they would never do anything else. But then if you read their autobiographies, they hate it. Like I read Andre Agassi's, and he's just a horrible life. I think a lot of them have horrible lives because living that single-minded life, which you need to do to be number one in the world, but most of us aren't looking to be number one in the world. We're looking to have fulfilled, wide-ranging, happy lives that contribute to those around us. And for that, being single-mindedly stuck on a single task isn't going to fulfill us.
Exactly. And I think also one of the things that I've learned through meditation and this idea of charm is, being a dancer, I was very much like that. But it was very charming to train and to keep evolving. But sometimes, there are tasks that once were very charming, and then they're not at all. And so I do use charm as a meter to go, is there any here at all? Like if it lacks all charm, there's none to be found, I can go, oh yeah, wait, why am I doing this again? Because I had this preconceived idea that this is what I was supposed to do. So not only is charm a way of leading you towards something that is maybe more in line with what it is that you're seeking to do, usually discover something about yourself. It's also a way of uncovering that the task you're currently doing, if it lacks all charm, needs to be revisited. You really need to revisit why it is that you're continuing to repeat this thing. But when you're highly stressed out and you don't have a meditation practice, all of those signals get confused. If a healthy body craves what it's lacking, right? If there's something in the system that's not there, then you'll get a healthy craving. But you could get, like you were saying before, people who are highly stressed, they're going to be attracted to sugar or alcohol or whatnot. It's not necessarily an indication that the body needs that, but a confused signal of all of these things because stress is now at play. And that is why, again, it's good to reiterate that this refinement that we have of detecting charm is meditation specific, but it works to both degrees as well. Charming, yeah, here in this direction, this task that you've been doing for a really long time that was charming, it's lost its charm. Why don't you take a step back again, like you always do, and listen to where charm is now saying, I'm over here, I'm over there, which is, a great benefit that we have. Because when I think about it, that sounds very charming. That sounds like a very charmed way to live your life. And I think you both know Anand Mathura from India at Sattva. I've heard him say on more than one occasion, he doesn't do anything that's not charming. If it's not charming, he's not doing it. And I would agree. I mean, he has this beautiful resort in India. He's releasing books. He's very knowledgeable, leading people in all kinds of different skills and techniques. And to see a man like that go, yes, charm is the way to go, I definitely can get on board with that 100%.
It's interesting what you're saying, Derrick, about people in the work environment, being charmed on to things. I've seen so many non-meditating friends of mine who have had a very single-minded view as to what they want to do and have pursued it at considerable personal cost. And they've been climbing up the mountain, pushing competitors off the mountain as they keep getting higher and higher and higher. And they get to the top. It's an old cliche, but they get to the top and they look around and they realize they're on the wrong mountain. That they've spent all that time climbing, but without stopping, as Rory was saying, the stepping stones. And that came home to me when I was on a big trek in Nepal, where, for the locals, it was just a gentle walk. But for us Westerners, it was a real tough hike, especially at altitude. But you go up what you thought was a mountain, you get to the top. And as you neared the top, it would then flatten out and you'd realize that beyond there was yet another mountain to climb. And so there were these kind of stepping stones as you kept on going up. But every time you got to a plateau, you could then look around and admire the view and decide, well, do I want to keep climbing or do I want to move laterally or go around the side and maybe there's a different path or maybe I could go down and then up because that mountain over there looks more attractive. And I think, so often when people are stressed, they have this tunnel vision. Of course, that is a classic example, that's a classic feature of being stressed, that you're not hearing properly, you're not seeing properly. And all that fine level of feeling just completely disappears, just goes. Yeah. So Rory, when you were working in the music business in these amazing jobs, did you find that the actual physical experience of listening to bands, did you find that changed as you started to meditate? Did you find that what was charming before perhaps didn't seem to be so charming anymore?
Well, definitely working in music changes, working in anything changes your relationship to it. And it obviously got to a stage where I was like, oh my God, I can't be bothered to go to this Wednesday night free gig tonight and I'm tired. And I think obviously our tastes change over the years, and definitely change as we get older. But I think, yeah, recently I was, I go running and I listen to different types of music, and I was kind of reviewing some of my favorite bands from when I was younger. And I used to love Metallica. So this is in the mid-90s. Metallica were the biggest band in the world, but they're quite a hard, dark band. And I was listening to the album, and then I was just like, this got a good vibe. and just imagine myself, I don't have kids, but just imagining myself going, look, son, this is bad music. Like, it's got bad vibes in it. But I think, it made me think that teenagers, because they're in that kind of hormonal, all over the place time, they kind of go towards things that are charming, that might be dark. It's like typical, I'm going to paint my bedroom black phase, where you're just testing, what's it like if I go towards these darker things. So we definitely change over time. But what I was thinking with what you were saying, Derrick, is about the food aspect. So Vedic meditation falls into that wider school of Ayurveda, which I've only read about a little bit, but I love how it kind of fits into this, where in Ayurveda it's about following what your body needs. So, and this is, again, you can't do it if you're a sugar junkie or a coffee junkie, but if you have a kind of refined nervous system, you listen and go, okay, what does my body feel like? It feels like sweet, so rather than having chocolate, I'm going to have a piece of fruit. Or I feel like having something warm, so I'm going to have soup. And how we can ignore those feelings about what our body needs because we have these other kind of societal dictates. So for me, it was always like, I never liked eating kind of cold salad, and I just thought that was because I was like a boy who didn't want to eat his greens. But then going to an Ayurvedic doctor, they're just like, no, because you have this Vata constitution, warm foods are much more in line with what you need and with your digestion. And that was just like, oh, well, yeah, I always knew that I didn't like salad, and it was always just like, this cold food in my mouth. And it's just, what I liked about that is it backs up things that you already know instinctively. And, again, it's those, you still have to have that difference between, what's I will just want sugar and I just want chocolate, and what are those natural feelings for natural kind of products. So I love how that plays into this, and also the aversion aspect of this. So it's charm and aversion. So again, I've been rereading my journal and about how I used to be this drinker, and I used to regularly drink, and it started coming in over the years after I started meditating that my aversion to drinking became stronger and stronger, but I would plow through it because it was such a big part of my social life. But then stopping to resist that aversion and just be like, which when you make the revelation, you're like, oh, I felt like I should go to that party, but I shouldn't drink. And then you go and do that and you have a great time, and then you don't have a hangover, and it's like, wow, you can still be sociable and not drink. And it was like such a revelation to me, which to anyone else would have just been like, just go because you feel like going, and don't drink because you don't feel like drinking. But we get into such habits where we kind of carry on these unhealthy behaviors just because it's what we do. And we have this thing where we maintain consistency for consistency's sake, even with stuff that's not good for us, or I hear about people who watch a whole Netflix series of something they didn't like because they're not the sort of person who gives up watching something. I'm just like, we just watched 10 episodes of something you didn't like, which is crazy.
It might get better. It's like when you go to a movie and after the first 20 minutes you go, I'm not so sure about this. But I've spent $20 and, I better see it out, rather than just saying, let's get up and go. Yeah.
Yeah,
but I think, Rory, what you say is very... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, with books, I'm like, if after... Because I'm quite a slow reader. If I'm not liking it after, 10% of the book, it's gone.
I like Rory though, the way, because I hadn't really thought about it, like you were talking about how the body feels expansive, when you find something charming over how it feels constricted and smaller, and the relationship to big self versus small self. And now that we're talking about, your food preferences and how the body's really involved in that too, you know, as a dancer, I used to sweat a lot, and it would be easy. I would just be very, very sweaty. And, you know, people had told me before would say, people who sweat a lot, there's a problem there. You know what I mean? Like if you're sweating profusely, there's something wrong. And when I did a little bit more research, I found out the truth is if you do sweat a lot, it means your body's actually very efficient at cooling itself. So if you are engaged in a lot of activity and you're not sweating, there might be a problem because your body might be overheating. But on the flip side of that, just because you're sweating doesn't mean that you're efficiently cooling yourself either, because you could have done very little, but you're sweating profusely. You know what I mean? So when you find out how your body is behaving or responding in alignment with either expansion or charm or doing what it's designed to do, then you have better and clearer signals that these things are probably together and charm or whatever it is at play versus that why do I want, and even just thinking about it right now, because I don't drink either, but I used to. And even just recalling it, I'm thinking, yeah, I kind of have almost I gotta get it. There's like a tension in there, which I feel like that is not anything like when I'm having a charming feeling at all. And I don't know that I really, really noticed that, but yeah, definitely expansive is where it's at, versus the smallness of whatever the contraction of that little ego, small me self. So I think it's really interesting to pull that out and kind of have those equated with each other.
It's an interesting thing, it just reminded me about drinking, because I read this book called This Naked Mind, which is, it helps people cut down or give up drinking, which, is part of my journey. And the interesting thing with alcohol is if you remember your first ever drink, anyone's first ever drink, however young you were, you did not like it. You would have been like, this is disgusting, because it's a kind of poisonous thing. And most people are like, they're sick or they spit it out. So we have a natural aversion to this, but we, through society or, through whatever means, we build up a tolerance. So much so that we're like, I actually like this, but I never built up a tolerance for whiskey. I was always just like, this is disgusting. Why do people like this? Because there's such pungent things, and I love that way of thinking about it. It's like, remember back to the first time you had a drink, you did not like it, your body rejected it, but we build up a tolerance for it, tolerance for this, people call it a poison, but it's like we're ignoring that natural aversion. And, they say that if, if you leave stuff outside, animals will generally come and eat it. If you leave food outside, animals don't touch alcohol, apart from those funny cases where they have like drunk reindeer in Russia or something, but they don't, eating fermented berries, but they don't generally drink our alcohol because it's clearly, they have a clear aversion to it because it's kind of a poisonous thing. But we've somehow got into this state where we collectively keep drinking this thing, even though our first taste of it is aversion.
That reminds me, Rory, of the first time I had a cigarette. And, it was behind a tree with a mate at school who had lived abroad, and he managed to get some duty free, and it was really exciting. We were doing something. It was the first day back at school. And I just remember this bitterness and, of course, coughing. And then later, I was bringing up all sorts of nasty stuff in my mouth. This was my body rejecting it. And I really didn't enjoy the experience. And that was I probably smoked 3 or 4 times, and that was it, because I just really didn't like it. But of course, both with smoking and drinking, there's this kind of societal support particularly in the UK, where drinking is a massive part of our culture, that everybody's doing it, and if you don't do it, you're a bit of a weirdo. And when I gave up drink in 1990, it was really, really difficult to begin with, because people kind of viewed me askance. They thought there was something wrong. Are you not drinking because you've got a health issue? And sometimes it was easier to sort of indicate, yeah, maybe I do, rather than just say, well, I've given it up, because then they think, well, that's something really odd about you. But of course now it's quite normal, to go to somebody's place and say, can I drink a glass of water, or have you got some juice? And they think nothing of it. Vegetarian food, years ago, the French still don't understand what vegetarian food is. Actually, it's even true in Indian restaurants. I and a friend went out on New Year's Eve to a really beautiful Indian restaurant. We decided to have the vegetarian menu, and they brought us a little tomato soup to start with, just a little glass of it, just to sort of get us going. And it was absolutely delicious. What's in that? He said, well, we start with a lamb stock, and then we ate, whoa! It was sort of shocking that it was so delicious, But it was, I must confess, it was delicious. But it's this understanding that we're putting strain on our body. This is what you were talking about, Derrick. The strain is there, and we really ignore that at our peril, because if we continue to put strain, then we're going to get ill, and it's going to lead to all sorts of things. And so once we can recognize that strain is taking place, and then take positive and affirmative action to address it rather than ignoring it, then we're going to start moving in the right direction. Instead of being charmed by the stuff that's actually not doing us good, we'll be charmed by the stuff that is more sustainable and more nourishing.
It's interesting that, we're talking a lot about food and the body, because a few years ago, I, for a while, pretty strictly was following a Paleolithic diet and was getting rid of certain things at certain times. And from the reading that I was doing, they're talking about how your gut biome has its own intelligence. And by feeding those bacteria the wrong kinds of foods, it can actually send mixed signals to your brain to tell you to eat certain things that you actually don't need or want, but the bacteria is getting confused. And as I started to eliminate certain things from my diet, then I started also to eliminate the craving for those things, and I could trust my gut a little bit better. You know what I mean? Because, it's believed that you're made up of cells, but you're made up of bacteria as well. And so there's this other intelligence that's going on. Your gut, it's literally trying to tell you certain things. But if it's not getting the right nutrition, or if it's overstressed, then the signals are completely wrong. So like having a Paleolithic diet, which is much more in line to how our DNA has really evolved over time, it just makes more sense that I had more energy. I used to have like this brain foggy situation when I woke up in the morning. I had clogged sinuses. And as all of that dissipated, I could actually listen to my gut and to what my body needed. And meditation is the same thing for the mind and the body together. It's clearing out all that unnecessary stuff that's gunking it up, that's making you think, oh, you need to do this and you need to do that, and you don't. You need to clear all that out so you can hear what your gut is saying, And even as a choreographer or as an artist, I generally have a gut feeling about how to move or what to do. And when I involve the intellect, when I get my mind involved, I go, maybe not, maybe I should do something else, make 3 or 4 different choices, only to come back to the first choice that I made originally. It's the best one, the gut choice. I should have just listened to it in the beginning. And meditation has gotten me closer, have an even greater trust with my gut, because it knows what's up. It's, we are this one thing, consciousness, that's who we are. And through nature, it's trying to tell us this is what's going on. And it's just, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but I hope that people are realizing how jam-packed our lives have become with all these things that are just completely deadening and muting the natural signals that our bodies are giving us to go do this thing, go and eat this thing. And meditation probably has never been more relevant than right now, and every day I'm grateful to have more clarity and to have the ability to listen to what nature is telling us already.
And it's the thing about how if we try and use logical arguments to make decisions, like the mind's an amazing tool, but it can make an argument about whatever case you want. It's like one of those lawyers that, the amoral lawyers that go and defend the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world. It's like, it's good. It can make a case. Whatever you decide to do, it can make a convincing case because it's only got to convince you. And this is why it's great for ratifying whatever decision you make, but it's not good at making that initial decision, especially with these big choices, because there's too many variables. So the scientific research I read on this is that, the mind can only hold 4 bits of information at any one point. So say with my decision to take that job, or anyone's decision to take a job, you can maybe hold in, the salary, the job prospects, whether you get a company car, how in line it is with your passion. But there could be 50 other things at play there, like what's the industry conditions, what's the global trend, is digital media going to take off over print, all these kind of things that your whole natural intelligence can take in all that information, which it then presents back to you as a feeling. But your conscious brain can only hold 4 things at once. So you're probably thinking salary, but salary, but salary, but job security. And you're just sticking to a couple of them, and you're not able to take all of the kind of cumulative bits of information that there are. So being more in touch with that, which is why, meditation isn't the only way to de-excite ourselves, because we're getting in touch with that stillest part of ourselves. It's the best way to do it, but it's not the only way. Like, you think of more traditional ways, which might be like, oh, you've got a big decision to make, go for a walk, go for a nice walk in the park, go for a walk down the beach, because that's for people who don't know how to meditate, that's the easiest way to do it. It's just like go and get in nature, or go somewhere, go and have a swim, go and have, around here, go and have a surf, get in touch where you're going to be not in your thinking mind, where you're going to be able to hear what you're naturally feeling, which is basically get out of the kind of normal stimulus places. But through meditation, we have this way to specifically and reliably get to this point in 20 minutes. So, if I want to go for a nice walk down the coast, I'm going to be thinking, right, well, that's going to take at least an hour or so of my day. I'm going to have a shower when I get back. So I'm not going to have that regular thing where meditation is this thing where we dip into that. It's never more than, we do it twice a day. It's never more than, say, 6, 7, 8 hours, or however many hours, 12 hours, say, max, before we've had another meditation. So we're never too far away from it. But if we don't have meditation, we just, our stress tank's filling up, and it's filling up. And if we're trying to make big life decisions where we're full of stress, it's not going to work. Like, stress just blocks so many parts of our decision-making process. We all know about the fight or flight reaction. It's literally closing down parts of your brain that you don't need to survive. And if you're in survival mode, you're going to work off those, very primal instincts. In my example, I'm like salary, job security. They're the safety things. They're the kind of survival metrics. But if you're always in survival mode, then you're not going to be living this full and satisfied life. You're going to be living the survival life.
Yeah, Rory, it's a very interesting point. I think within the meditation, we're also getting perspective. That it's like going back to climbing up the mountain. That you can see everything starting to lay itself out in front of you, and that's when you can start to see the connections and the subtleties and the nuances and the differences, which are not apparent when you've got your eyes open. And so all that subtlety, you may not be aware of that happening in your meditation, but when you open your eyes, suddenly everything seems to be a lot clearer, and instinctively you make the right decision. And that's is what you were talking about, Derrick. It's that gut instinct. And in the medical world, they talk about the gut, the belly being the second brain. That there's a lot going on there, and I think perspective for me, I mean, that's probably one of the greatest benefits I've received out of meditation in the last 15 years, is just seeing where I stand, seeing where everything else stands. And when you open your eyes, instinctively, you know what's charming. It's just obvious.
Okay, thank you for watching until the end. Each episode, we offer a takeaway, a practical exercise you can do at home to apply this knowledge into your daily life. In this episode, we were talking about charm and how to trust our internal guidance system of intuition. This week, the challenge is to examine a few of your current desires and discover what seems charming to you right now. As developing meditators, it's important for us to be able to discern between ego-led desires and things that come from our higher selves. Take a few minutes to create a list of your desires and examine what's driving them. Do they benefit you and others in the long run, or are they more superficial and temporary wants? Understanding the quality of your desires will help you prioritize what's important to you. If you're happy to share your stories and experiences, we'd love to hear them and for you to join the conversation. Please send them through to us at stories@thevedic.conversation.com or post them on social media with the hashtag #TheVedicConversation. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your followers and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you next time.